It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Happy 4th of July or later, depending on where you're listening. Because this is a podcast. You can listen anytime you want. It's our holiday mailbag. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen. Thanks for checking us out here as part of your holiday weekend. We thought it'd be pretty fun. It's the middle of summer, obviously. Not too much going on. Thankfully, this is the time of year where if there's things happening with your team, they're typically not great unless you got a player that has been franchise tagged and you're waiting for that deadline to pass. We've been through that a couple times, seen some extensions this time of year. But typically this is please don't let my phone ring season for coaches. So we thought we'd ring up all of you and get some mailbag questions in, and you guys delivered. So we got some good ones, Logan. You ready to go and help people celebrate their holiday with football and nonsense?
Yeah, absolutely. Enjoy the barbecue or enjoy barbecuing while listening to our podcast, right?
There you go. And there is a barbecue adjacent question to close out the pod. So I'm very excited for that later on. We need to help settle a debate that someone asked me about. So Logan doesn't know that question yet. There's two questions that Logan doesn't know about. That's one of them. But we'll get to that debate on the back end of the podcast. We did get, and this happens. I just want to acknowledge. Obviously, we're not going to have time to get to a lot of questions because you guys submitted so many, which is great. We appreciate the enthusiasm, and don't be afraid to submit again in the future if yours doesn't get answered. But we got some questions like this from Big Bad Brand. Said any notable names that you think won't make our 53 due to the numbers game, but could they find their way on another team before the season starts? Yes, but we talked about that before. I did a whole thing on that on the Hoffman show with Michael Phillips. So some of these we're skipping because we've answered them before. The good news is it's a podcast, and you can go back and you can listen to that archive whenever you want.
Yeah, and I think, anytime we're talking roster decisions, I'm always a big believer. There's guys that look good or bad in the middle of, OTAs and minicamp, but then they kind of figure it out or they regress during training camp. So I always like to kind of save those lists until we're in the teeth of training camp, closer to preseason, just because it's more data points, kind of get you more information. So
yeah. So I will say to that question specifically, Michael and I, during the end of minicamp, we talked about groups of guys that will be battling for spots.
I think you did a good job on that, actually.
So
I thought you did
thank
a good
you.
job with that.
So if you want to go back in the Hoffman Show archive and check that out, definitely worth a listen. I think actually we put that in the Take Command feed as well, because that was when you were on vacation. So you can go back in the Take Command feed and check that out. All right, to the questions, Logan. This one from Wicked Flow, which I'm going to imagine he's from Boston. It's Wicked Flow, dude. Craig, love the pod and the show. Question I have is, you've mentioned previously some of the things about Kliff's previous offense that scares you a bit. Lack of pre-snap motion, not a lot of creativity in routes, heavy shotgun, etc. How do you both feel about the offense so far? Of course, we have talked about this some as well, but Logan, let's do a short version of the summation of what we saw from Kliff specifically in OTAs and minicamp.
Yeah, well, the OTA minicamp structure is a little bit different than what it's been because it's been predominantly 7-on-7. So, in those types of 7-on-7 periods, you're not going to get a fully fleshed out version of the offense. But I think with the stuff that we did see, I was relatively pleased. I saw multiple different personnel packages. So we've got some 12, some 13. We've got people lined up in kind of a fullback spot. We've got empty with tight ends, we've got empty with wide receivers, we've got empty with running backs, and that's not totally unusual, but I like that they're in that kind of early flexibility already. And then I like how you mentioned the lack of pre-snap motion, or the question mentioned the lack of pre-snap motion. I thought I saw enough of pre-snap motions and shifts that you can tell that's something Kliff is thinking about critically and trying to get implemented in the office, in conjunction with the things that make his offense good already, which are the tempo, kind of the air raid, I'm going to say air raid in loose quotes here, kind of this spread them out version of the offense.
Air raid inspiration.
Yeah, correct. And I think all that stuff, to me, I came out relatively pleased. You know what I'm saying? But again, it's OTAs. And I think another reason that I was pleased is because Jane Daniels did a good job of executing it, right? And I think all those things kind of working together make you feel better about it, because there were times where I really enjoyed watching Scott Turner's offense, times. And there were times where I was critical of it, obviously. But I look at that and I say to myself, one of the reasons it didn't look good at times was because the person executing the plays didn't do a good job of it. And so now you have a guy here in Jaden Daniels who at least is showing an ability to get that done in conjunction with the pre-snap motion, in conjunction with the screen game, in conjunction with the formations and the personnels. So I'd say I'm relatively optimistic about it. Again, you got to see an offense like when we're doing team periods, when we're doing preseason, when we're enjoying practices, all those different things are super important. But I'd say kind of high level, I'm optimistic and with the right to reserve, the ability to change my decision as we get closer to training camp.
For sure. Like, it's the time of year that we're all always optimistic. You just kind of can't help it. Last year, I think we were both optimistic about what EBU was doing. And then we saw how he actually deployed it on Sundays, and we're like, oh, no.
Yeah.
So
that's a great point.
that is something, too. Like, they can choose to practice whatever they want on a scripted period in the middle of May. What happens when the bullets are flying? Like, how do you call it? Like, how do you actually deploy those plays? How do you put together a game plan that's specific to the opponent? So there's a lot of factors that are just, it's too early to tell. I will say one thing that I do like that you mentioned is the deployment of different personnel groupings, because you want variety, but you also want some level of sameness, which I realize seems like an oxymoron. But if everything is different, then it actually is telling to a defense as well. If you always are in this personnel grouping and this formation, that means you're running this play, well, then it's a dead giveaway. Like, there is some magic to what Sean McVay did his first year in LA, I think it was, when he was in 11 personnel 90% of the time. And they had like a couple of different formations. They would deploy guys differently. Guys would line up different places, but the personnel almost never changed. So there was no, based off personnel, dead giveaway of what you were doing before you even broke the huddle. And Sean was able to use that to his advantage. Kliff is doing kind of the inverse, where it's like they have a set number of formations. They have like a decent amount, but maybe not as many as some other offenses, but they could run them out of 22, 12, 11, whatever different personnel groupings, and line guys up in different places and create matchups. And all of a sudden you might be staring at the same formation, but as a nickel player, last snap you were staring at Brian Robinson, and now you're staring at Terry McLaurin. And what that means is, who knows? And that to me is like a really, really good quality in an offense.
100%. And I think, you kind of look at, successful like high school offenses, because, like you kind of distill it down to like the simplest version of offense. And like single wing, you line up in the same formation every time. There's very little pre-snap, but it doesn't give the defense any kind of specific tell, right? And obviously you have to kind of make things more complicated as you move up the thing. You see the triple option with the academies in college, relatively the same every single time. And, when you look at Kyle's offense, when you look at Mike McDaniel's offense, they take a game plan formation, and that's kind of what they're running. And then they have a couple different plays off that formation. So like when the defense says, oh, this is the formation we're getting here. They ran a run out of it last time. This time it's a pass, and this time it's a play action, or this time it's a reverse. And to your point, like with the formation, there are defenses that check differently to different personnel groupings. Like just like kind of the simplest example is like, let's say you're in 13 personnel. So 3 tight ends, a back, and a wide receiver. There are teams that'll play only cover 3 to that. Like that's the call, is cover 3, because it's predominantly a run formation, right? So we want to make sure that safety's out in the box, and then you can get into empty with those guys. And all of a sudden you're in your base defensive personnel, you're in cover 3, and you might be running a really simplistic, straightforward concept, but because of of your ability to dictate to the defense, now you have the advantage, even though you're running something relatively straightforward. So I think it's great to see all this stuff from Kliff, and I want to see more of it. I want to see him continue to kind of build and extrapolate on it.
For sure. All right, next question from @12thman. What are the important signs of progress we should look for as training camp transpires? Are there certain stages to it? Tackling introduced, things like that. The answer to that part is yes. When the pads go on, so the first couple of days are acclimation days. They'll redo basically some of these mini camps or some of these OTA periods where it's day one installed, you start over. Then the pads come on and you start to build off of that. Obviously, there'll be joint practices and stuff as well. But I think the first question is the most important one, Logan. Like once we kind of get into the throes of it, the pads are on, they're practicing every single day. What are we, and there's only like 5 practices open to fans this year, but for those of us that get to go, what are we looking for to know that this team is progressing towards being ready to play week 1?
Well, I think there's a couple things. There's like the macro and the micro level. I think on the micro level, obviously you want to see players developing and progressing with certain skill sets, So, everyone's been talking about Jamin Davis as a pass rusher. Like, what does that look like? Jahan Dotson getting working his releases versus press, man-to-man coverage. Like, what does that look like? So there's those types of individual progressions. Brandon Coleman playing left tackle. What does that look like? Has he developed this tech? Has he cultivated his techniques? Does he schematically understand what's happening? And then there's kind of the level above that, which is the defense and the offense. And I think when you're looking for there, it's just kind of how sharp everything looks. Like, are they having a lot of do-overs? Are they having a lot of kind of missed assignments? And that can be hard to tell sometimes when you're watching, but you can feel it. Like, when I watch a lot of film, obviously. And so, like, there's times you're watching a game or you're watching, like a high school game or a college game or whatever it is, and you can tell the spacing just isn't right, and that's something that hasn't been detailed. And you see that in NFL practices too, but you see it way less because they're professionals, obviously. But like, right. if every day you go to practice and you're like, man, those two guys are pretty close to each other, or that didn't time up with the quarterback's drop, like offensively, then you say to yourself, that's some stuff that they got to work on, and the offense isn't progressing exactly the way they want. It's the same thing with the running, with the run game stuff. Like, are the double teams, is the offensive line, building these interpersonal relationships to kind of work a double team and understand that, when the linebacker is plus strong, it looks like this. And when he's plus weak, it looks like this, right? And like those subtle variations and nuance, and then the timing of the back to the run, there's a lot of kind of, like subtlety there, but it shows the health of an offense. And when you've been around an offense for a long time, like when you've been guys have been in an offense for 3 or 4 years, you go to practice, you're like, oh man, like that's pretty crisp, that's pretty sharp, that's really well executed. They understand the details and the variation of this offense. And so I think that's something I'm going to be keeping an eye on. But you mentioned like the pad day is important. The first, like I know people want to poo-poo the preseason. First joint practice is extremely important. Preseason is important. And like those are, to me, like the really big markers of training camp. And you just want to see kind of, again, generally, that consistency of the offense developing in terms of timing, spacing, rhythm. And then the defense is kind of the same thing. Like, how are they matching certain concepts? How are they checking versus challenging shifts and motions? Are they communicating? Well, I think that's a big thing for me is how is the defense communicating, and are guys playing fast the football? And ultimately that's what you want to see at, as they get through the pads, as they get through the first joint practice. I think I keep thinking back to last year, when we went to Baltimore, everyone was really juiced about how practice had been going in Ashburn. Then they went to Baltimore and it was kind of like, actually the front's playing okay, but the back end looks a little bit out of sorts. And so again, it's a good opportunity to be like, hey, it's not going to be perfect, but are they playing fast? Are they playing confident? Are they getting stuff communicated? Are they playing the right techniques versus a different opponent? And so that's all the ways you kind of grade that progression going forward.
Yeah, and the good news is the Commanders have multiple joint practices this year. They have Miami, and then they have the Jets as well. You have the preseason games. I also think that we poo-pooed preseason games often. It's just like, they're preseason games. But there is an element to that because you're not game planning and all that kind of stuff. But there is, I think I appreciate more now seeing the practices this spring. I appreciate the attention to detail and kind of the consistency and level that we see versus in the past in terms of communication and all those types of things. And so are we seeing that in the preseason games, I think is a really vital question. Do we see is the third unit creating turnovers like they are in practice? Like things like that, just because that speaks to the coaching and the consistency for everyone and their players' ability to receive information. So again, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but it is what we have that time of year. Those are the checkpoints, I think, along the way. And I think that there's a general attitude that Dan brings as a head coach that he's going to care about the preseason. He's going to want to go out there and win. He's going to go out there and compete. Not that he's going to be like, okay, well, let's make sure of it because we're going to game plan and we're going to own these guys. He's just like, no, we're going to go out and Dan would be like, we're going to go out and we're going to kick some ass. And it's like, okay, that's the Dan Quinn way. And I'm curious to see how that does play out in the preseason. I think the other big thing, the most obvious one to double click on the player stuff is Jaden. What's the most important thing is Jaden Daniels consistently being the best quarterback out there and reminding us why we felt the way we did in the spring, which is that he should definitely be QB1. Hopefully it's a little bit closer just because Marcus is playing better as QB2. We'd like to see some improvement from Mariota for sure to push Jaden. Not that he needs the push, but like you'd rather have two good quarterbacks than one. But ultimately, like it does Jaden not only keep the level, but continue to grow and continue to show why he was the number 2 pick and why a lot of people came out of the spring being like, whoa, this kid is different and in a way that's fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the Jaden thing there, because the other thing that you get to see, like, joint practices is obviously we're working against another team, but there's a little bit, and to be fair, it's a ramp up from just, regular practice. It's starting to get in the realm of feeling like a game, having done it. Like I used to remember I'd treat a joint practice like I would a game. Like that's how fast I'd try to play and how physical I try to play. But then you get to the preseason and it ramps up a little bit in terms of intensity. It does, like for whatever reason. And I think it's because you're in front of fans, you got the lights on, you got the jerseys on. And even though the game plan's simplified, guys sometimes have a hard time with that transition. Some younger guys, and I think you mentioned Jane Daniels, like a guy that I have the utmost confidence in, at least through his offseason process and obviously watching his college film. But you kind of say, like, how is it when the lights are on? Is everything okay? Does he communicate well?
I also think about the fact that he comes in early every day and practices the script, right? Yeah. Which is a great learning tool. And ultimately, like, he's ready for practice. But what happens when there's no script, right? Now, you're running the same plays that you've practiced. So he should have the recall. And that's obviously that process worked for him at LSU because look at what he did in the games at LSU. But it is the first time we get to test that at the professional level.
100%. So and I think those are always really good markers. And then generally, if you're going to practice, one of those 5 open practices, like how smooth does it look? How tight does it look? How does the execution look? Are guys running out of the huddle? Are guys confident at the line of scrimmage? And what I mean by that is, like, are they looking around? Do they know the play? Like, all those types of things are really good markers and indicators of where the offense or defense is at. And then, obviously we got the other big markers to kind of help guide that evaluation.
For sure. All right, mailbag part 2, Logan, is general football / NFL questions. Tim Smith asks, if a separator is knowledge, why collectively bargain away being able to be with coaches more for class time? One would think that would benefit vets. And so to explain this question a little bit further, over the course of the last few decades in the NFL, the offseason has been shortened and shortened and shortened. There are very strict limits on how much players can be in the building in the offseason. It is something the players have asked for and gotten. Now, there's a lot of complications with that. I'm not going to overset up this question, Logan. I'm merely going to toss it to you for an answer, and then we can get into the weeds.
Yeah, so I was actually here, I was playing in the NFL when they did this, when they made this decision, which was 2011 with the new CBA, and I remember everyone kind of came in and presented it as like, oh, this is going to be, kind of by everyone, I mean the NFLPA and then our kind of senior leadership of like the players union. At the time it was like Drew Brees and Jeff Saturday, they were really excited about limiting our exposure in the offseason, which I do think there is value to, right? Because like before, in 2010, if you were in the building working out, a coach could come grab you, hypothetically, from the weight room and be like, hey man, let's go do some tackling on the dummy outside. Go put your helmet and pads on. Like whenever they wanted, you know what I mean? And like, again, that, in terms of knowledge is power. Like, again, it's great to work on techniques. It's great to work on football specific stuff, but also like, I don't want to be beating the crap out of myself if unnecessarily, like right when the season's over, I'd like to kind of get some decompress time and I want to use the facility as I want to use the facility for a period of time just to kind of get away. So I do think like there were people that were definitely abusing that ability to access players, coaches I'm talking about now. And so the senior leadership, these veteran guys were like, well, we want to be in the building less for the offseason. And I remember thinking this at the time, because this was I was going into my second year and I remember talking to my agent about it. And he, in his great foresight, was like, this is going to really hurt young players. And I don't think it's not a coincidence that the older players, motivated by wanting to spend time with family, wanting to get away from the building, they know the offense, they know the defense, they know what they need to know. Like their mental development in the offseason is very limited, and they know exactly what they need to do. Like look at Tom Brady, look at Peyton Manning, look at Drew Brees. Like their offseason process is super locked in, super dialed in. They can have open communication with the coaches, whatever they need to do, because they're veterans, right? The people that it hurts the most are guys like that were in my position, undrafted free agents, guys that are kind of trying to get in that 53 to 40 man of the roster spot there, just kind of fill out the bottom half of the roster, because those are the things that are really important in terms of developing your knowledge. You want to be around the offense. You want to be around the coaches. You want to be around the techniques as much as possible. And I think this is one of the reasons why, and we've talked about this on the show before, you've seen a decrease or kind of a decline in technical offensive line play, is because you've lost the ability to communicate and develop these techniques with these offensive players. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that, it's becoming harder for younger guys to get in the league who are undrafted. And there's a million other reasons for that. The abridged offseason has changed how they handle UDFAs, the NFL teams I've been on, right? It used to be like, hey, here's 10 UDFAs, right? And every team would do that. And now it's like, here's 1, here's 2 of guys that we really have targeted and feel good about, because those other guys, there's no way they're going to make the team. So I think because of how the NFLPA did that initial deal in 2011, it benefits older veteran players because they don't want to be in the building, but I'd say it hurts like 80% of the roster of guys who need technical and tactical development. So that's kind of my thought on it, because I think the question is perfect. It's like, if you could get guys in the building year round, yeah, they'd know the offense really well and they'd be really smart. But the guys that helped negotiate that portion of the deal felt that wasn't important. And to be fair, it was not important to them because of who they are.
And that's the stickler here is, you know who's not in the room at the senior levels of leadership of the NFLPA? Young undrafted free agents.
Logan Paulson wasn't in there,
yeah. It's the same reason there's a rookie salary scale, because you want to know who's not negotiating the CBA? Rookies, guys that are in college right now. Because when they did that for the first time, I think Cam Newton was the first guy who had a rookie scaled contract as the number 1 overall pick. If Cam, while he was at Auburn, had been able to be in the room, he would have been like, hell no, I don't want this.
Yeah.
Last year, Matt Stafford 2 years prior signed some ridiculously massive deal with the number 1 pick with the Lions, one of the higher paid quarterbacks in the league. Yeah. Cam comes in and he's got the rookie salary scale. I think I
remember it was Sam Bradford made $65 million, then Cam made 21.
Yeah.
It's just to give you an idea of how drastically that switched in an offseason.
Right. And so, Cam wasn't in the room to fight for himself, and nobody was going to fight on his behalf, because ultimately the vets were like, oh, sweet, this is more money for us. Which is funny because it doesn't always actually play out that way.
Correct,
what actually wound up happening is it backfired, and now teams are like, well, we want rookie salary scale guys, as many as we possibly can, and then we'll just pay if you're like, you superstar, we'll pay you a boatload of money, and we'll try to fill out the roster with the cheapest guys possible. And the NFL's middle class got slashed / older vets that had really important roles on rosters in terms of winning football games. It's like, we'd rather take a flyer on a young guy who's cheaper anyway. So good job on that. But when we talk about the in the building stuff, I totally agree. I just think I don't often like talking about the amount of money that guys make in the league, because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Right.
They are ultimately the most important labor, and y'all deserve it as players. But I also don't think it's unreasonable to ask you to work a little bit more than just the season. It's a 4, 5, 6 month season, depending on how you want to look at it. And then you have, 7, 8 months if you want to include OTAs and minicamp. And it's like, okay, well, you get 4 months off, and dudes are making how much? I don't think it's unreasonable to require guys to be in the building. Even the mandatory minicamp or the voluntary OTA type stuff, I'm like, I have no problem if teams want to make that mandatory. Right. But I think it's actually deeper than that. I think the bigger thing is, like you said, being in the building, having access to coaches if you want it, and then also the actual physical working out. Because we've seen this happen a couple of times in recent years where guys get hurt working out with their private trainers. And you have to work out with a private trainer or work out on your own in some capacity, because you have to be ready for the season. You have to be ready for OTAs. You have to stay in shape. But if you work out and get hurt away from the facility, which is always a risk, it's just part of training, you are eligible for the non-football injury list and or getting cut. Yeah. And if you were working out at the facility, you'd be you're now hurt on the team's time, and you go on IR and you still get your money. So there is a practical purpose to renegotiating this in a future CBA to allow guys to be at the facility, or at least to figure out some kind of carve out on that. Hey, if I'm working out in the off season and I'm under contract and I'm in a football workout, even if it's with a private trainer, is there some liability, that we can
Protection,
negotiate? Yeah, some protection. Thank you. That we can negotiate. So there's a lot more factors to this that are, maybe less boring and less sexy. But I think on the biggest picture, to the heart of Tim's question, yeah, if there was a way to say, hey, coaches can't go make you put your helmet and pads on, but there is more classroom time. There is the ability to talk in the offseason. It's not as restrictive, and guys are in the building more. I think that actually would be good for the league, and the product would ultimately get better as a result, and players would be better as a result.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, like you're going to get a lot of pushback from players because they really value their time. And I think it's important, again, to acknowledge, having been on that side of it, like how much of a grind the season is, man. Like I've roughly talked about my schedule before in season. Like you're in the building, or at least I was in the building at like 6. I didn't get home until probably 7:30. Like, and that was pretty consistent, like almost every day. Obviously Friday's a little bit different because that's kind of your lighter day, but like you're grinding, you know what I mean? And the coaches are grinding. And so I understand why guys don't necessarily want to be in there, but there's a lot of things that you have to do to get better at your craft that you don't want to do. Like I honestly don't want to back squat. I don't want to back squat all the time, but I know it's going to make me stronger, right? I don't want to watch film all the time, but it's going to make me a better football player. And so sometimes I do feel guys need to kind of have their hand held a little bit, like kind of be like forced to take your vitamins. Like that's the best way I can put it. Like this will make you better. And I understand you want to give guys more autonomy. You want to give them more freedom. And I honestly, I think that's one of the reasons you see the rise, like the explosion, quite frankly, of these personal coaches that are skill-based in terms of their teachings, right? You get like your Duke Manyweathers, you get your, like the pass rush specialists that are all over, the route specialists. It's because they don't have that access in the building anymore. And those guys do have value, but I do think their value would be significantly less if you could go to your coach and be like, how do you want me to run this route? You'd be like, oh, I want you to run it like this. This is a release I want you to use. And you're like, okay, cool. I don't need to go see, especially, and like, I do a little bit of that myself. And the one thing I'm always negotiating is I don't want to give you information that is counter to what your coaches want, because ultimately those are the dudes that are gonna allow you to make the team. Is that guy right there? So I do think it's a really complicated, nebulous thing, and I think the players thought they were doing something that was going to benefit themselves, but I think it hurts them, especially young players, young developmental guys. It hurts them tremendously. Yeah,
no doubt about it. CBA just got renegotiated too a couple of years ago, so I think we got a while before the next one's up. So probably not any changes coming to that anytime soon. But great question from Tim. All right, next question from let's see. Do we want to go this one? Let's go this one from Benjamin. Is a good player on a great contract more valuable than an elite player on a top-of-the-line contract? And Benjamin also specifies a great contract, good player, which is a reasonable expectation for a first-rounder, more valuable than an elite player on the top-of-the-line contract, like, say, Brandon Ayuk.
I see what you're saying. So first off, if you get a good player on a great contract, that's great. That's good for your team. It's good for team building, period, right? Because it financially allows you to do more. You get a good player under contract. I will say, however, if a dude is truly elite, and this is where you get in trouble, I think, is when if a dude is truly elite, then of course you pay him whatever he wants. I think Justin Jefferson is a perfect example of that. Like, he's the best receiver in football. He elevates any quarterback that's going to be playing with him. Like, so, everyone talks about the quarterback elevating receivers or elevating an offense. Like, he elevates that offense in a way that most non-quarterbacks can't. So I'm going to pay him what he wants to be paid, right? You look at the quarterbacks, obviously they impact the game at a high level. Like, you're talking about maybe 4 guys in the league, 5 guys in the league that have this ability to impact you on every single play. You know what I mean? Like, you talk about your Josh Allens, your Joe Burrows, your Justin Herberts, maybe your Lamar Jacksons, and obviously your Patrick Mahomes. You know what I mean? So those guys, yeah, you got to pay them, and because they make everybody in the organization better. However, unless they're one of those guys, which is a very, kind of small margin you're aiming for, I think you're looking for good players on good contract values. Like, that's really when you look at like the San Francisco 49ers, when you look at, I think Detroit Lions might be a better example. Like, when they had Jared Goff on like a really, like, that's not a great quarterback contract, but it's a very team-friendly quarterback contract, and he was playing as a good quarterback. It allowed them to do so much more with the roster. It allowed them to build the best offensive line in football. And now they've extended him. They've extended a couple other players. Watch that roster deteriorate. I think another great example is the Seattle Seahawks when they were on that tremendous run back in the early 2010, 11, 12, whatever that was. Like that team was compiled of dudes on good contracts for good players, and then the second they kind of hit the Super Bowl and hit that playoff run, those guys wanted more money. The roster kind of deteriorated. Russell Wilson, who was a good player on a good contract, became a good player on a bad contract because it was so much money, and it just deteriorates the roster. So you're always kind of walking that line with free agency. And I go back to my original point. If you're a truly excellent player, like, you're going to get paid whatever you want. You're going to set the market, which is appropriate. I think teams screw up oftentimes because they think they've got a guy who's elite, who's not elite, and it hamstrings their roster because they made a mistake.
No, totally. And it's really tough to look at your guy and be like, hey man, you're really, really, really good, but you're not elite.
Right.
And that is not something that players want to hear. Because they feel like, oh, you don't believe in me, you don't believe I can take another step, whatever. But it's just like, hey, like, do you want to win or not? And that would be kind of what the GM has to find a way to say much nicer than I just did. But this is also why, to just build off that, there's nothing more valuable than a great player on a good contract. Right. AKA, you get a guy who pops early, and you have, especially at the quarterback position, a truly great player on a rookie deal. It's why the rookie quarterback timeline is so valuable. And that if Jaden Daniels, for instance, for the Commanders, can be really, really good or even great in the first 2 years of his deal, and then when you have 3 years where he is great on a rookie contract, it is the most valuable thing, maybe not just in this sport, but in all of sports anywhere. Because it allows you to overpay other guys. And if you have a really, really good player that's maybe not elite but wants elite money, but you know that you have a chance to win a Super Bowl and he's going to really elevate your chances, you can pay him that. And those are the kinds of decisions you can't make once you've signed that quarterback to monster money. And so, that becomes really, really valuable. And obviously the Seattle example is about as good as anyone you'll ever see with what they were able to do with Russell Wilson back in the day. But there's plenty of others as well that, we've seen, Cincinnati, some of the success they've had, some of the guys they've brought in when Burrow was on the rookie deal, Mahomes and what they did with that roster early with him in Kansas City. And now they've had to make some tough decisions, Tyreek Hill, L'Jarius Sneed, et cetera, because they've paid Mahomes what he's worth. Now, Pat's worth it because he's, not just the best currently, maybe he's the best ever by the time it's all said and done. But the decisions you have to make and thus your margin for error becomes a lot more difficult and a lot smaller once that quarterback especially, but also, other elite players who cost a lot of money get paid.
Yeah, and I think, again, like you mentioned Jaden Daniels, and one of the things about him that I thought was really interesting is, like, even if he's above average, that quarterback value is tremendous. Yeah. Like, he doesn't even need to be good. He just needs to be above average for you to be reaping the benefits of that. I think you see that kind of as a case study with Brock Purdy in San Francisco. Like, his first 2 years specifically, like, he was average to above average, like probably top maybe 17, 15 quarterback in the NFL. But elevated by the roster, elevated by the play caller, and was able to develop into somebody that is now like a good player. You know what I mean? A guy that you're like, man, he's in the conversation as a top 12 guy in the NFL, which is great. But the value of him just being average was tremendous for that roster for a long time, right? It kind of covered up some of their other quarterback issues, their mistakes they made because he was just average. And then you mentioned Patrick Mahomes, and Patrick Mahomes to me is so interesting because he's the best player in football on a really good contract value. And everyone says, oh, he's making $500 million or whatever it is. But like the way that they structured that deal over 10 years, it allows the team, because of how the salary cap goes up every year, it fixes his cost even as the salary cap goes up. So they have more.
Which is why they just redid it, by the way.
Yeah.
They redid it, what was it, last offseason, I think? Because they're like, okay, you're now officially underpaid.
Yeah, right. But I think like that's when you sign deals like that for players like that. Like, even though that seems crazy, if that's the dude and you're able to fix his contract value for 10 years, again, they just redid it. Like, it does so much for your team and so much for your ability to construct a roster around him. So I think it's obviously the sweet spot there is that like good player on a good contract, right? But if you have that guy, like, think of your Aaron Donalds, your Justin Jeffersons, We mentioned the quarterbacks. It's hard to think of other players that deserve that max contract value, but there are guys that do. And when you see those guys, you just got to pay them. As a GM, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm looking for those good players on good contract values and building the team around that. And one of the points that you pointed out, Craig, I think, which is great, is the thing that the main tool that allows me to do that is getting a good quarterback contract in terms of value.
No doubt. And the best example in history is Brady, who just took pay cut after pay cut. Yeah. And they were able to, it's not like they went out and signed a bunch of stars, but they just were able to keep the team together and have really solid players all around the roster because Brady didn't cost what he should have.
I had a talk with Scott Pioli when I was in Atlanta about that specifically. And he's like, I know it doesn't seem like a lot of money going from, and I think this is crazy to talk about. He's like, they were talking about, it was like $17 million a year or $15 million a year, which now for quarterback contracts is wild, And he was saying that one of the things that $2 million allows you to do is like re-sign a guy like Mike Vrabel, right? Because you can give him that money, and that adds up over the course of the contract, where you're able to keep around, veteran leadership. You're able to keep around a developmental guy maybe that you wouldn't have been able to keep around otherwise, and you're just generally able to strengthen the quality of the roster. And so that's smart footballing by Tom Brady, again, who for him, he's making a ton of money on endorsements. Yeah. He's doing all this other stuff.
And at the time, was married to a supermodel who was worth $1 billion. He made hundreds of millions of dollars in his career and was the second richest in his household.
Yeah. No, and so again, it's the more you can do to kind of think about it as more like to keep the backbone of the roster intact. The more you can do to do that, I think the better you are. And again, you do that through favorable contract values.
For sure. All right, a couple more fun football questions and a couple of fun non-football questions. This one came to you, Logan, on Instagram from John, who said, tight end seems like a position that a lot of guys can transfer into. We've seen Logan Thomas, quarterback, Antonio Gates, and others, Tony Gonzalez, for basketball players to tight ends. But it's also this really difficult position where it's part O-line, part wide receiver. So how do you square that? And would it just make more sense for an Antonio Gates or a Tony Gonzalez or a Logan Thomas to learn wide receiver or offensive line versus this combo position at tight end?
Yeah, I mean it's a really good question, and one that I've had a really hard time kind of navigating because everyone kind of seems to just put the transfer guys there. And I think part of it deals with the fact you're not dealing with crazy athleticism. And so what I mean by that, let me just stop you for a second. So if I'm playing left tackle, for example, I'm going to be 6'4" to 6'7". I'm going to be 330 pounds, and I'm going to have to do something very specific in terms of pass protection, right? It's very technical, very athletically demanding, and that's really, really hard to learn. That's very, very hard to learn. And then if I'm running routes like a receiver, I need to be insanely fast, right? Insanely great deceleration. At tight end, there's a little bit of a gray area, right? There's athletically, there's a little bit of a gray area. You need to be a great athlete, but it's not the top end speed of a receiver and the top end deceleration qualities of a receiver, and it's not the technical ability of the offensive tackle, right? So you get away with being an okay pass protector. You can get away with being an okay route runner, because you're a little bit bigger, you're running routes against worse coverage players, and that's why guys like Antonio Gates are able to murder. And again, Antonio Gates is a great route runner and great feel for running routes, but they basically put him in a position where you're going to run routes. You cannot win a route versus an elite defensive back, but you can win a route versus a linebacker or safety. And so let's put you out there. And so again, while the position mentally is very complex and very nuanced, the ability or the challenge technically is not there the same way, because the max speed, the max deceleration values aren't the same. The size, technical element of the offensive line aren't the same. So you can get away kind of parking somebody there in an offense and being like, hey, we'll give you a year or two to figure it out.
Yeah, the harsher version of it is if you're too small to play O-line and too slow to play receiver, you just fall into tight end. Yeah. Because you're too small to play O-line, you're 6'6" and 280 pounds. Okay, well, that's a perfect size tight end. You're too slow to play receiver at 4'6", 40, which amongst any mere mortal is so fast.
That's always a fun thing, Craig. Have you ever? I'm sure you've done this before. When someone's I could run a sub 540. I'm I bet you can't break 5'5", and they're like, no, do it. Let's do it right now. And you're at you're in like the parking lot of like a bar and you time someone and they're running like a 6 flat. Like people don't understand how fast some of these dudes are at the sizes they are. Anyway, go ahead.
It's a 5'2", which is like incredibly like that's O-line speed is so fast. Like unbelievable. And especially like these dudes are running laser times, not to get all super nerdy on it, but like it's one thing to do it on your buddy who's also drunk in the bar parking lot. He's a little slow on his trigger finger on his iPhone. Let's get some lasers out there and watch you run a 7.4, buddy. Like it just is what it is. It's really, really fast. So like, if you run a 4.6, you're probably not playing receiver in the NFL. And if you're running 4.6 because you're a little bit bigger, you're 6'5", 250 pounds. Like, well, now you're actually pretty quick and still very, very good sized tight end. So if we can teach you how to block decently enough, and you have the route running ability of like a not quite NFL caliber, but really good college level wide receiver. Well, you're going to be a really, really great pass catching tight end in theory in the NFL. So it kind of falls into that way. It is incredibly mentally demanding. There is a ton, and that's why not everybody can do it. Like Tim Tebow should have been an awesome NFL tight end when he tried to convert. He wasn't. He just didn't have it. Dude tried really hard, had a lot of great athletic ability, but just it didn't work for him. So it is a real compliment to Logan Thomas, to Antonio Gates, to Tony Gonzalez. Certainly, Gates and Gonzalez are Hall of Famers, two of the 5 best guys to ever play the position. Travis Kelce was a college quarterback when he got to Cincinnati and then ultimately converted. So it is mentally demanding, but that's kind of the physical nature of it. Just lends itself to too small to play O-line, too big to play receiver, perfect tight end.
And I think the other thing is like everyone hears those names and says, oh, it happens all the time. But it also happens all the time where people don't make it. I played with a guy in Atlanta. Alex Gray was trying to play tight end after playing rugby for a while. He was an excellent athlete, like really tremendous. Didn't work out for him, right? He just couldn't. It just didn't click, right? And then you look at a guy like Sammy Reyes, who has everything you want, physically. Just doesn't happen because they don't understand the angles, they don't understand the physicality, and they don't have. And I think the other thing about those other guys you mentioned, the Logan Thomases, Logan's a little bit of an exception, but like your Jimmy Grahams, your Antonio Gates, who was the other? Gonzalez, right? Like they are really, really, really good receiving tight ends. So they have this card that they can lay on the table and be like, I will get open. So the technical nuanced blocking element of the position is not as important. But if you don't have that card you can lay on the table, i.e. Sammy Reyes or, Alex Gray is the other guy that I was talking about, then you have to be really good at blocking. And that becomes the thing that's really, really technically challenging for a lot of these guys to figure out. So if you can run routes and get open, like we'll find a way to get you on the field, I think. And I think that's one of the reasons Logan Thomas's story is so interesting is because he kind of did it the other way. He proved himself as a blocker with a little bit of pass game upside, and then made a career of it. But again, the thing that saved him was the pass game upside. And I think when you look at tight ends now, like to be a true blocking Y in the NFL, like you have to be of a special cut. And that's why you don't see these tight ends often transfer these basketball players transferring from their other sport to the position, because to do that, to block, because it is so complicated. It's like the martial art element. And so that pass game ability is something that makes it a little bit easier for those guys to stick around.
It's also why we think about the greatest tight ends of all time, and some of them are conversion players, Graham, Gonzalez, Gates. They're not converted. They're not the converted left tackle. I don't know who the best converted left tackle or tight end is. I'm sure there's been some great ones, and you know the history of the position better, considering
Jason
you played
Peters
it.
Probably, but because you played tight end in college and moved to tackle in the NFL.
Well, I'm talking about the other way, the guys who were went to O-line.
The physicality, O-line. That's the thing, is the physicality of offensive line for any other sport is absolutely insane. I think Jordan Mailata is maybe the best one, this rugby player that moved to left tackle. Yeah. But again, he's a unicorn because he's the one guy who's been able to do it at a high level. And I think that the angles, the physicality, the hand placement, the technical, it's so technical. I wish I could explain it on this show. To play offensive line is insane. So it's just a really hard position to transfer to from a different sport.
Yeah, and he's had the great mentors and maybe the best O-line coach in football in Jeff Stoutland, who's been able to help him in Philly. All All right, last couple of questions, Logan. Fun off-the-field questions, although this first one, admittedly, we've gotten this a lot over the couple years of doing the podcast. I've never asked you this. I've never asked you this as a friend either, but I'm going to ask it now, and I don't know whether it's actually fun. But from A_process, how did Logan break his nose?
I've done it probably 8 times. So, like, I was playing soccer, and I went up for a header, and somebody hit me with their head in the nose, so that was 1.
Oh.
My little brother had a yo-yo that he was spinning around his head, and I came around the corner and hit me right on the bridge. That was 2. I was playing basketball, went up for a rebound, and somebody was coming down with their elbow, hit me right in the nose. That was 3. Ew. And then I was playing tag with one of my friends, and I got pushed, and I fell into the ground. That was 4 or 5. And then there was a couple in there. And then obviously the one that everyone knows is the one where Cooley changed my face mask before practice. And I told you the story, right, Craig? So so Cooley wanted me to get a smaller face mask. Like, I had this crazy offensive line face mask that covered my neck, which I liked because people used to try and grab my throat, like to kind of fend off a block, you know? So I liked having the extra little bit of protection there. And Cooley's like, it doesn't look good. Your swag is minus 1,000. It's going to affect your ability. Met? Yeah, it's going to affect your ability to make the team. And I was like, nah, I'm going to keep it. And so one day I went up to a special teams meeting, and I came back, and he literally gave me like a 2-bar, like not quite a kicker face mask, but pretty gosh darn close, right? And so I went out to practice because I didn't have time to change it back, and I was playing fullback on a scout team play, and I had a lead play on Andre Carter, and I hit him. And I remember like just getting a splattering of blood on the inside of my face mask. And I was like, I think something's probably wrong with my face. So I went to the trainer, and I was like, is something, like, what happened? What's going on? And he was like, I think you broke your nose. And so I went in, got an x-ray. They're like, yeah, you broke your nose. And I remember talking to the doctor, and he was like, oh yeah, we don't do surgery for this. We don't fix this type of break. It heals on its own. Don't worry about it. And I remember the next day, and the head trainer still will text me about this. Ben Roethlisberger had the same break in practice, diagnosed, via X-ray, and he got the surgery to fix it within 24 hours of him breaking his nose. But basically, they didn't want me to have to miss practice, file an injury complaint, and have to pay for the surgery to fix my nose. So I just practiced the rest of the week with a broken nose, which sounds crazy, but it didn't hurt that bad because I'd done it so many times. So your body's just used to it. So I think that was 6. I'm probably missing 2, but they're all very similar, obviously.
I almost regret asking.
Really?
Oh, I'm uncomfortable. Yeah, no, that stuff I don't. Yeah. Oh, ow. Also, God, old Commanders, old Washington football ethics. Not on the broken nose. Hey, we don't want to pay for your surgery. That's
we don't
messed
do
up.
them. But I don't know if I would have done it because I didn't want to miss practice. I was an undrafted free agent. I needed to practice.
I get it.
So I'm not going to knock them. But that was the most recent one that I've done, is that one.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Okay. On a much less serious note.
Yeah.
Disco asks.
Disco.
We need help settling the debate. It's July 4th. Charcoal or gas grills?
Oh. Are you a big grill guy, Craig?
Yes, although not currently because I live in the middle of the city in a condo that I don't have access to a grill. My old apartment building, we did have grill access on the top, and they were some really not great quality gas grills. I don't have a lot of experience with charcoal grills. We had a gas grill growing up. Whenever we go back to my parents' house in South Carolina, they like to grill, and I'm like, can I please grill? Because I miss doing it, and the food just tastes great. I do think that there is something to the charcoal grill in terms of the smoky flavor, and it's a little bit different flavor. There's a reason I think most grill masters do the charcoal stuff. Obviously, a lot of them, if you're talking about smoking stuff, you're on wood. But yeah, a gas grill is just a lot easier. I think it's probably safer. I don't know whether charcoal smoke on your food in the long term is the best thing, although it's probably in such small quantities that it doesn't actually matter, like for your long-term health. So yeah, I would say for pure, like if I got to grill something, best taste, charcoal, practicality, functionality, your everyday grill out in your backyard. If you have a backyard, gas is probably easier.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, my dad growing up was always crazy dogmatic about the charcoal. Mm-hmm. And so we would set up the grill, and it was always this crazy process where it's like, we got to get the charcoal out. We got to make sure it lights, and you'd be watching it like from inside the house or like, on the porch, wherever you're doing the grill. And it would just take like an hour and a half or 2 hours to make sure the coals were all right. And then you put the food on. So like if we were going to eat at like 6, to start the process at like 3 o'clock, just getting everybody
for that.
organized. And so then when I started using a gas grill, like my father-in-law had one, and I was just like, this is so much easier. It's just like, oh, we want to cook right now. Oh, I'm just going to turn this on and we're going to have fire. We're going to cook this. It's like,
oh, we can turn it up and down.
Yeah. That takes 5 seconds. You're like, great, let's do that. So I became a convenience griller. And again, like I think you're probably right. The taste is probably a little bit better with the charcoal, but
is it worth 3 hours of getting your coals ready?
Yeah. After I broke my nose for the 8th time, the taste became less important. You know what I mean? Like the tasting, the palate wasn't quite as refined. So I was like, this tastes just as good. We'll be all right with the gas grill.
What's on the Paulson family 4th of July cookout menu?
So usually, like, because I'm here, like, usually just come up here with my parents and my brother for the 4th of July. So we'll do like burgers and hot dogs and chicken and stuff like that. Nothing too crazy. If we're feeling really fancy, we'll do like a filet or something like that. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward, and we just make a ton of food because, like, I'm a pretty big guy. My brother's a pretty big guy. My parents get after it on 4th of July. So we make a ton of food and just kind of eat till we're sick, and then, clean up afterwards.
Any sides of note?
People hate this, but like I'm still like pretty health conscious, even though like I'm done playing. So like I say a burger, but like it's like a really lean cut of meat. Like I don't eat both buns. Like so for sides, it's pretty like it's like there's a veggie, there's maybe a starch. Like I eat plain potatoes. Like you know what I'm saying? Like I don't put it. You know what I'm saying? Like it's so people come here. They're like, they're like, what is going?
Simple.
They're like, you can't eat, like, you can't enjoy eating a potato with no toppings on it. It's like, I don't enjoy it, but I'm not eating it because it tastes good. I'm eating it because it's gasoline for my body.
What's your ability to taste? What does it matter?
I mean, that's another great point. Like, so sides.
I didn't think those two questions would be related.
They are related, very related. But again, so for me, it's like my family, they'll do like, fancier stuff, but I'm pretty like, does this fit my macros? Yes or no? All right, let's keep it moving.
Enjoy your food, Coach. Come on. Enjoy food. Food is meant to be enjoyed. It's meant to fuel our bodies and to be enjoyed.
Well, you've seen me. I obviously enjoy food. I just enjoy the healthier versions of food. Yeah,
I mean, balance. 4th of July, like macaroni salad, point. Potato salad. I like all that stuff. At a barbecue, get some grilled chicken, but like grilled chicken is the best version of chicken. So that's not like let me eat the healthy grilled chicken. Like, also let me eat the healthy grilled chicken on many days a week. But like it is the best version of a chicken breast is a grilled chicken breast, seasoned nice, maybe some kind of dipping sauce on the side if that's your thing. Burgers, hot dogs. Yeah. 4th of July, just keep it simple. Definitely the way to go. I used to grill a lot of steak back. I used to like once a week, or my solo single back in the day diet, if you will, / menu. I'd buy a steak every single week, and I'd pick a night where I'd have a steak and would grill out like 3 or 4 nights a week. I would fire up the grill because it was just as easy as turn it on the oven or the stove or whatever. When I was living out in Reston on the lake in a townhouse that I share with a couple other people. So I would just get home and fire up the grill and hey, this is the way I'm going to cook my food. So that was fun. But now I live in a condo in the city and we do have a grill pan though. Sometimes we'll use the grill pan. Maybe we'll do that on 4th of July. Maybe we'll get some burgers and hot dogs and We'll just use the grill pan on the stove.
Is it like I don't know if we have even time for this. What's a grill pan? It has like ridges.
Oh,
on
it's
it
just
or
it's got like the ridges, like a grill. I mean, a grill's got the grates, so like it's got a rise on it in the pan.
I see.
So you still kind of get the. It's not like it's sitting in the grease,
see.
You're no longer pan frying it. It's definitely not the same because you don't have like the airflow and the whole deal.
Yeah.
But you do get a little bit of that. You can get some char marks. It's the best you can do.
Sounds pretty sad. Sounds
City
you're,
life,
you're
man.
sad about my sides. That sounded sad to me.
Maybe we'll get like a little. I don't know. I'm like, well, I'm looking at over here because that's my patio is over here. I don't know if we can get like a little hibachi style grill.
Yeah, there you go.
Do that on the patio, or are we gonna get kicked out of our condo?
Yeah, who knows?
I don't want to find out. I do want some burgers and hot dogs though, so maybe we'll figure it out. All right, that's our show. Happy holidays, everybody. Summer version, and we'll see you next week. More countdown / list season. What else we got? We got some guests we've been trying to nail down. So we'll figure out what we're doing. I don't know. We'll talk football. It'll be fun. Join us.
Yeah.
We'll see you next week. If you like this show, thank you. Hit the subscribe button. It's how it shows up in your podcast feed every single week, every time we publish an episode. Other than that, if you want more nonsense and sports talk, the Hoffman Show podcast available in all the same places that this one is. So make sure you subscribe to that as well. Plenty to listen to over the holiday weekend. For Logan, I'm Craig, and we'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.